They will stop at nothing to sacrifice you to their gods. Keep your distance from these warriors, as they are deadly close-range combat.
This probably requires an explanation. Let's step back to the year 2008. At this time, two things were going on. I mean, I'm sure a lot of things were going on in 2008, but only two things we need to care about. One, online multiplayer games were absolutely booming thanks to the current consoles of the day having relatively functional and convenient networking capabilities. Two, Valve not only still made games, but when they released a game, they would leave entire trends in the wake of their popularity. We're still living through the hero shooter craze largely created by Team Fortress 2, released just a year prior in 2007. It was at this time that Valve released Left 4 Dead, and it was an instant hit, creating a genre boom for the cooperative horde shooter type of game. Left 4 Dead didn't invent this kind of game, to be clear, but it certainly was a massive popularizing force. Jump forward 1 year, almost to the day, and Valve releases Left 4 Dead 2. And people love this game. It still has a massive player base to this day. I love this game. This is the second time I've somehow come up with an excuse to yap about it on this channel. It's just, this game's fantastic, man. If you clicked on this video, I'm operating under the assumption you're at least already somewhat familiar, but if you're not, they sell it on Steam for like £9. Go give it a spin and come back, alright? There's never been a bad time to play Left 4 Dead 2, since in the intervening years since its release, the many imitators that have come and gone have generally been okay, but not much more than that. But there is one imitator that I would like to single out as the absolute worst in class, and is today's autopsy subject. This is the worst Left 4 Dead clone. Revelations 2012. Revelations 2012 was released on April of the titular year, and true to that is primarily themed around the crank belief that the apocalypse would take place on 2012, the end date of the Mesoamerican long count calendar. Despite having a lot of stiff competition in this regard from people to shitty disaster movies, Revelations makes a pretty compelling argument for being the worst thing inspired by that whole phenomenon. Booting up the game, we get this extremely badass company logo. Dark Arts Entertainment, spelled with a Z no less. That's how you know we're dealing with the real deal. I instinctively want to make fun of this because the effect looks like a shitty YouTube video, but oh, look at me in my glass house, let me throw this grenade real quick. We get the main menu, and this sure looks familiar, doesn't it? So let's start our playthrough. In a somewhat noteworthy change from Left 4 Dead, you start with only one stage and campaign unlocked, and the rest are unlocked in linear order as you clear the stages. As you can see here, I still have 2 campaigns locked. Let us begin.
In ancient Mayan prophecy, on December 21st, 2012, the gods will return during the Dark Galactic Alignment. It is foretold that 4 warriors will rise up to defeat evil and free mankind from enslavement. You have been brought here to fulfill that prophecy.
In case that didn't make much sense to you, we are 4 random clueless Americans with noticeably southern accents, although buggered if I could tell you from where in specific. And we've been transported somewhere, it's never specified, and given power armor and sci-fi guns to fight, quote, demons. Aha. One of our entourage helpfully pitches in.
Kelly? What just happened? And where are we?
I may have an answer to your question. It's only a guess, though, but I believe we somehow traveled into another dimension through the porthole that the monsters came through to Chichen Itza.
In case you didn't catch that, because our leads seem to have recorded all their lines from the other side of the room from the microphone, this is apparently a parallel dimension. Parallel dimension or no, I'm going to point this out once and then immediately move on from it, but fundamentally, this is a game about a bunch of white Americans being transported to an unspecified but still very clearly based on Mesoamerican architecture and civilization location, and shooting absolutely everything that moves. I trust I don't need to explain why the optics of this scenario aren't great. I don't really enjoy laboring this kind of thing because it's bad in the not funny way, and it seems the team also realized this wasn't an amazing look because in the main menu you can find an option labeled lore under the extras. And it shows you pages of text about how interesting the Maya people and their culture was. It's a bit surface level, nothing here strikes me as particularly wrong, but it sort of feels like it exists as a rhetorical shield more than an expression of genuine scholarly interest. This game isn't citing its sources with this, it's trying to cover its ass. Alright, enough of that crap. Let's get cracking on the first level. We meet our first foes, this game's equivalent to the Left 4 Dead common infective, and they behave fairly similarly. They run at you and try to hit you, albeit they all run like they need the toilet. What is not like Left 4 Dead is that they drop weirdly realistic-looking hearts that when picked up, heal you. Are we eating their hearts? Consuming the hearts of our fallen foes for strength? Why did they pick a human-looking heart for this? Gross. These are the only means of healing since this game doesn't have med packs or any kind of held item like grenades a la Left 4 Dead. For weaponry, we only have this basic pea shooter for now, which while it has an ammo count of its own, depleting it only slows down the rate of fire rather than stopping you entirely. It's a bit difficult to explain this with words, but can definitely be felt, but every enemy is a bit harder to hit than you'd expect, and unless you hit with direct headshots 100% of the time, they also all feel like they take 2 more shots to kill than is appropriate. Just a little too sturdy to feel good to mow down in a Horde shooter. This is on the normal difficulty setting. It gets worse if you challenge higher difficulties, but never mind that for now. Something that could potentially be cool and interesting about fighting the basic enemy is that they have locational damage that lets you blow limbs off, but they don't really have animations for this so much as they just snap into a new state of limblessness, which besides looking really weird, also makes it weirdly confusing to tell if you actually killed them or not. Many times while playing this game, I'd accidentally take the leg out of one of these guys, assume I killed them because they vanished from my sightline, only to realize I am still taking damage because they snapped to a ground-crawling state and were now biting my ankles. Continuing on with the first level, we run into the priest guy again, who tells us to watch out for traps. Who this guy is and why he's absolutely gigantic compared to the main characters is never really explained, don't worry about it. And traps we do indeed have to worry about because these stone heads will shoot arrows at you that you have to crouch under. Except it's weirdly hard to find the exact spot the game likes because the terrain isn't even and slight inclines can cause you to get clipped while crouching anyway. First level gimmick and it already kinda doesn't work right. This sort of thing is one of the major distinctions between Revelations and Left 4 Dead level design-wise. Not the part where it doesn't work properly, although that's certainly a recurring thing. But Revelations' increased emphasis on environmental hazards and traps that you have to navigate. Doing my best to crouch walk past the arrows, we arrive at a little mini-boss arena, although it starts kind of clumsily because I'm still getting shot by arrows my teammates are triggering as they trickle in behind me. And one of the bots starts the mini-boss by blithely walking into the guy. This big dude is basically just a damage sponge with 2 attacks, clubbing the person in front of him, and this ridiculous AoE stomp that also stuns everyone it hits for several full seconds, and the range is massive. It is so much bigger than the visual effect implies. It's almost twice as big. He can loop this thing if he feels like it and instantly wipe the party. Every time you fight one of these, you're gambling on the AI not realizing it has the power of Beast Eye at its disposal and never letting you play the game. This thing is a recurring enemy type, by the way, so you will be rolling those dice more than a few times. Fortunately, you have a stun-locking move of your own. Weapons have an alt-fire in this game, and the pea shooter's alt-fire is an exploding orb that similarly stuns everything within its radius. It does pretty decent damage, but you can only stock 3 of them, and your AI partners cannot and will not make use of them. For a petty minor game feel gripe, this is what secondary fire ammo looks like, and there's not really a clear indication of picking it up. It just slowly fades out of existence on a delay, and the only feedback you get is your player character saying a quip. But it's the same quip as when you pick up a healing item, and it doesn't always play. Since there's no clear indicator of being in range to pick something up, it's somewhat easy to not be quite close enough, which can be annoying when you're running past enemies trying to grab things quickly. The boss is defeated, I scoop up all remaining health pickups, which pushes my health past 100 since you can do that in this game. Health gained past 100 will slowly tick back down, much like Quake. Moving on prompts a Horde attack for no real reason. This is a thing that happens a lot in this game. Sure, Horde attacks could occur at random in Left 4 Dead, but these aren't random. These are scripted to occur at fixed points in the level with no obvious cause, unlike in Left 4 Dead where there's usually some kind of accompanying set piece. Furthermore, Left 4 Dead went to great pains to obscure the spawn points of common infected, so they'd seem to just pour in from all over the map, all around the city. Revelations 2012? Nah man, who cares? Just have them all drop in a huge cluster from the exact same spawn point. It's fine. Nobody cares. They spawn in such large quantities you get body blocked just trying to walk through by all the spawning enemies. I know I'm not exactly putting up much of a fight in this clip, preferring instead to use the dedicated dance button that exists, of course, why would that not be a thing, to confuse and bewilder my opponents. I get down because they're not as appreciative of my moves as I expected. This game borrows the Left 4 Dead incapacitation system wholesale, complete with 3 strikes and you're out mechanic. Except any single health pickup will reset how many knockdowns you need to die, so it's almost never a relevant factor, except for the bots who are bad at picking health up off the ground. After getting the crap kicked out of me, I collect a crystal skull and the shotgun. The crystal skulls all need to be picked up to end the level, they don't serve any other function, but they do spawn a power-up when collected that amps your fire rate. It also introduces 2 new enemies, the Priestess, who fires green projectiles at you, and they're very fast. Not quite hit scan, you can dodge them if you're constantly in motion, but slow down for even a nanosecond and they'll get you. And the War Boar, who charges at you and deals damage on contact, or even if it gets within your postcode, the hitbox is massive. This behavior is of course very similar to the Charger from Left 4 Dead 2, but what is not similar is that this guy can't pin you down and keep slamming you. In fact, none of the enemies can. This is one of those elements that seems so core to the design of Left 4 Dead that it's almost unthinkable anyone would try to excise it, but there's no special infected type enemies in Revelations that can immobilize a player and require them to be saved. All enemies just do damage. The only thing preventing a group from splitting up and being all over the map is the ungodly quantity of enemies spawning in, but that's only relevant if they can catch up to you. So Revelations is extremely permissive of taking it all the way back to the mid-2000s and going Leroy Jenkins up in this.
Alice, sweetie, can this wait?
In fact, this frequently turns into the best course of action because this game is, in my opinion, kind of difficult. At least in single player, since I have to play with bots with no spatial awareness. And no, I couldn't trick anyone into playing this with me, are you joking? The result of that is that Revelations 2012, despite borrowing huge amounts of the design language and underlying mechanics of Left 4 Dead, doesn't really end up playing much like it. It can't decide if it wants to be a co-op Horde shooter or something more like Serious Sam or Quake, and the resulting mix is interesting. I leave my shitty teammates behind to collect the next skull, but decide to double back when they die to respawn them from the requisite Left 4 Dead survivor closets. Except here they're actually specific structures for this purpose and not just a random cupboard. Fresh team in hand, I grab the second skull of the level and advance onwards to collect our third weapon, the sniper rifle. Although I somehow knock one off its table because the weapon pickups are themselves physics objects, which means it is perfectly possible to have your weapon spawn roll into a ditch somewhere, unbeknownst to you. And we need to solve what I will generously call a puzzle to open the level exit. Remove the noses. It refers to these things hanging on the wall. You even get a little picture. Shoot off a handful of these, hear a nice noise, door will unlock. I think it's somewhat easy to not realize these can even be interacted with, let alone with gunfire, because while you're trying to figure this out before the tooltip vanishes, you're being battered by respawning enemies, courtesy of this new enemy type, the Vixen. Essentially a mobile spawn point and incredibly tanky at that. From experience, just about the worst time to try and get a player to solve even mildly abstract problems like this is in the middle of being pestered by relentless fast-paced combat encounters. The first time I played this, I didn't even realize what I did right. Noses got knocked down by accident in the chaos and I left without realizing what had happened. Once we're done with that, we can now enter the exit and complete the first level.
You made it. Great job.
Thanks. Level 2 begins with us being trapped in a box while the priest character rambles at us for about a full minute, which is a weirdly frequent occurrence with this game. The walls unceremoniously turn into a stock stone asset, and we are tasked with destroying these statues that cause enemies to spawn in around them. This is a good time to highlight that Left 4 Dead keeps its enemy quantity under control with a fairly strict limit on how many common infected can spawn in at once, but it makes hordes feel denser with frequent sneaky unseen respawns. Revelations absolutely does not care about this at all, and these spawners will overwhelm you really fast if you're not quick to deal with them, since spawners never stop creating new enemies. It's a slog, but I deal with it, and on emerging to an outside area, I get some lore on my player character.
Hello, I'm an aerobic instructor.
Alright, good for you. Thanks for sharing with the class. Now we have a rocket launcher, which I attempted to use on another appearance of the mini-boss enemy. Exactly the same guy, no differences, but my teammates mostly just absorb the rockets with the backs of their heads. Kelly perishes, rest in peace Kelly, but that's the end of the level. Level 3 begins yet again with a minute of yapping, because when I think of Left 4 Dead, I think of mandatory dialogue interludes. This level starts us with the sniper rifle, because from this point on, you may or may not start levels with some of the other weapons. It's not a bug, it seems to be set on a per level basis, but I could never really grip the logic behind it. It's welcome though, since this level also introduces these assholes. The Dart Guy. Now, we've already met a projectile enemy, but this is a new breed because their attack inflicts a slow effect that is so dramatic it essentially stops you from moving at all for a few seconds, and worse still, this motherfucker is hit scan. As long as it can draw a line of sight between itself and you, it can hit you. It's got a fairly long wind-up, but that doesn't seem to help much when they can hit you from another continent, because if there is a range limit, it seems to be absolutely ginormous. What's weirder is that the developers seem to have been aware that this is annoying as shit, and made the outline of the blowpipes glow through the walls, which does help a lot with when you get mysteriously hit out of nowhere and spin around looking for the one random guy who sniped you from 10,000 miles away. This is my favorite kind of game design, when you have the awareness to notice something is frustrating to deal with, but also don't entirely care enough to rework it in some fashion. There's a bit of a backlash these days against ever calling games or developers lazy, because even bad games require a tremendous amount of effort to construct, and are usually the result of a hopelessly unrealistic development timeline. But this pseudo-wall hack is absolutely a lazy solution. Hey, game developers are people. Sometimes they half-ass stuff and knock off for lunch early too, just like you're doing right now, watching this while pretending to work at your job. Continuing on, I have to pass through this obvious spike trap that only an idiot would fall for.
Okay!
And a different, much less threatening spike trap that doesn't actually work half the time because it gets stuck on all the enemies spawning directly in the middle of its movement arc. It's mostly a straight shot to the end from here, but at one point one of the bots goes down, and I've rewatched this footage a bunch and I still can't divine how this happened. Look, the health just evaporates in a couple of seconds, but when I look back, nothing is there. This game does have a limit on how fast regular enemies can hit you, so you don't instantly melt when hordes hit you all at the same time, so I'm stumped for what happened back there. As penance for their failure, I lock the bots out of the safe room, although Revelations does not care if you do this, unlike Left 4 Dead. The next level starts out very trap-heavy. Flaming darts, moving crushers, spikes again, but with no cliff to knock you off this time. But the most deadly trap of all is actually this ladder. For the bots, anyway. For whatever reason, they do not successfully path up it correctly the vast majority of the time, and indeed my entire team dies unable to surmount this tremendous obstacle. This leaves me to struggle through alone, which sucks because the next set piece is a room that fills with poison gas when you collect the skull. Except it'd be more accurate to say it's a room that just starts draining your health the instant you touch the thing. It's not a matter of get out before it starts hurting you, you are going to lose about a third of your health. That is simply the tax you pay to continue playing. In what I think is honestly a pretty impressive display of pure gamer grit, I even make it through the next horde attack on my own, with barely enough health to limp to the survivor closet and revive the team. They're stupid, but stupid teammate is better than no teammate. Emerging through a portal, we arrive at what I'm led to believe is an observatory, if only just because that's the name of the map. There's some kind of grand music playing, and I think I'm supposed to be taking in the atmosphere, but what I'm actually doing is destroying an entire antique shop's worth of pottery for the health. The set piece of this area is pulling two levers to spawn a skull, then ascending to the top of the observatory to open the door to the exit, and then running back down. This is almost interesting as a piece of level design because it forces you to backtrack slightly, which forces you to fight the horde that has just spawned in, rather than being able to play Temple Run and skedaddle. It's weird that it deploys it here when in most other places it's perfectly content to just spawn all the enemies directly in front of you in massive piles, but I digress. Final level of the campaign, and instead of a finale event like what Left 4 Dead does, we have a boss fight against Eek, the Wind God. I've ignored pointing this out until now, but I like how every time a boss health bar appears it doesn't display the full number and automatically truncates because it doesn't fit the UI properly, until it takes damage. Then it shows properly. Anyway, how this fight works is that Eek sits in the center of the room, looping the same animation while you shoot him in his big dumb head. Eventually he starts spinning, which pulls you towards him, and if you get too close, you go spinning all around and he flings you into the air. This is problematic because the exact height you get flung and full damage itself is very unpredictable, so you might take 0 damage, you might instantly die, total coin flip. Then he naps off for a bit and spawns a bunch of these blue idiots from the worst Indiana Jones movie, which is actually just the Crystal Skull collectible model repurposed as an enemy, kind of creative in its own way, really. If they touch you, they will also fling you into the air with, again, somewhat random height and trajectory, so this might do very little damage, it might kill you on the spot. The biggest issue with this boss is how you're only given the default pea shooter for it, meaning it takes ages and you will run out of ammo very fast, leaving you to slowly plink away at its health bar. It's also pretty unengaging because for the most part the boss doesn't really do anything, you just shoot them while they sit there. When they spin, you crouch and hold back to slow the rate at which you are pulled towards them, and if you don't realize that's how you're meant to avoid this, then you're gonna get got by it a lot. The only obstacle presented is that rocks randomly fly around the arena and can collide with you, dealing small damage. This is largely ignorable, and even if it wasn't, the rock's behavior is so erratic that it's not really practical to dodge anyway. Slog through this for a few cycles, Ick explodes into several pieces, I claim this blue crystal, whatever this is meant to be for, and thus concludes the first campaign. 2 more to go. Now that we've finished the first campaign, I'd like to step back and talk about why this game has lived in my head for about a decade, long enough to make this video about it. Because if you go look up the game on Steam, you'll find it's free-to-play, and why are you dunking so hard on some random free-to-play game, Punchy? Sure, it looks bad, but there's lots of crap on Steam. Isn't this a bit mean to some hapless indies? Firstly, yes. Secondly, it wasn't free when it came out, and I absolutely paid money for it. Why? Because at the time, I had severe Left 4 Dead brain rot and would buy and play just about anything that was vaguely similar. I actually still have that problem. I played Back 4 Blood too. It wasn't very good. If you stepped back in time and told me that nobody was ever going to do it better than Left 4 Dead 2, I'd be so confused and disappointed. What do you mean it's been over a decade and still nobody's really topped a game released on the Xbox 360? But let me get back on track. SteamDB actually won't go back far enough for me to tell you what the launch price was, and I don't remember. I actually tried to check my fucking bank statements to find the charge and couldn't find it there either. But this announcement post in May of 2012 boasts of a price reduction to $10, so it must have cost more prior. It didn't go free to play until 5 years after release in 2017. That's not the point anyway. I'm not mad about whatever I paid, of course. It's been over a decade. The point is that this was a commercial release, plopped out onto Steam in April 2012, and that release date is interesting. In 2012, you couldn't just release a game onto Steam all willy-nilly like you can now. Steam wouldn't create any sort of public submissions portals for games until they rolled out Steam Greenlight later that year. You had to go through a whole process with Valve, and they were notoriously pretty challenging to get an okay from, especially for indie developers. So the fact that this somehow passed in front of them and they signed off on it is already mystifying on face value. It's not like now where low-effort shovelware is pouring out of Steam left, right, and center because nobody's really at the wheel. Human beings had to look at this and go, yeah, this looks good. And this happened at a time where being on Steam at all was a huge boon in visibility for any production, so Revelations attracted a certain amount of scrutiny just for this alone. And ultimately, while I'm glad Valve let it by because it makes me laugh a lot, how it passed internal approval will forever be a mystery. But there's another layer to that. Now, some of you might be ahead of me on this, but Revelations 2012 isn't a mere ordinary Left 4 Dead clone. It doesn't just borrow the underlying structure, mechanics, presentation, and design language of Left 4 Dead, it borrows the engine. It's a Source engine game. Revelations isn't merely a copy, it's literally built on top of Left 4 Dead 2 as the base. A lot of Left 4 Dead's assets and behaviors are still in there, largely unaltered. It is essentially a fancy Left 4 Dead 2 mod. In fact, while browsing the Steam community page, I stumbled onto a picture from a Japanese player that revealed that playing the game in Japanese causes all of the character and campaign names to default back to their Left 4 Dead 2 equivalents. You might not understand the significance of this, but Source Engine, as Valve's own homegrown engine, isn't something you can just use to make commercial games with. Sure, Valve lets people release free mods on Steam nowadays without a license, but if you want to actually charge money, you need to pay the licensing fee, and there's no hard data on how much this would have cost to do because there's no public information. Projects are negotiated directly with Valve on an individual basis. There's also the cost of licensing the Havok physics engine used in Source and other various bits and bobs. We have a hard number on Havok, they charge $25,000 per game. But the rest of the Source engine? Total guess. Almost impossible to get any hard numbers on this. But the director of Hunt Down the Free Man, a different and honestly pretty similar poor quality but officially licensed Source engine game that was its own fiasco back in its day, quoted a figure of $50,000 back in 2016 on a live stream, probably breaking an NDA in the process.
$50,000 left. And $50,000 of that just goes to the licensing the game.
The point of me saying all this isn't to itemize the cost of Revelations development. The point is, this game needed a pretty non-trivial amount of cash up front to even exist at all. Which is baffling because this doesn't look like the result of a team that had possibly 6 digits up front to blow on licensing costs. Although we can't ever know exactly what they paid. Valve is also known to be pretty cagey with licensing the Source engine. Like I said, you have to negotiate directly, and they can and are known to just decline people. They are not obligated to say yes even if you do have the money. Valve does whatever the hell they want, so once again, how this got the okay from them is a mystery. I feel like the most likely explanation is a guy who knew a guy kind of situation, but that's extremely impolite speculation on my part. All of that taken in its totality means this isn't regular modern Steam shovelware where the low cost of release makes spamming the storefront a semi-viable tactic. This is a sincere attempt to create a viable product on a then burgeoning platform where a decent chunk of money must have been sunk into the project simply as a basic consequence of its existence. And that's what makes Revelations a fascinating release. Someone, somewhere, must have thought this was a good idea. There's an earnestness to this that makes it more worthy of being remembered than your average Steam dumpster fire. But also, it is fun to look at dumpster fires, so let's get back to that. Campaign the Second. Revelations just rolls straight into the next campaign after you complete the previous one, rather than kicking you back out to the lobby. This one starts with the most staple set piece of any video game set in a vague jungle temple type environment, avoiding boulders, which seems governed by the chaos of the physics engine because they just bounce around unpredictably and crash into each other like pinballs. These boulders pop into existence on the side you need to emerge from, and why yes, there is nothing stopping them from just spawning in on top of you, thank you for asking. Trying to proceed past this gate, but I notice the bots aren't keeping up, and when I go to investigate why, I find that one of the bots somehow managed to get themselves blown off the map entirely, but not in a way that caused instant death. So I just had to wait there for them to die. Rest in peace, Kelly. Again. Moving past the hanging fish, which you need to be slightly mindful of because as physics objects they are capable of hurting you if they wobble into you in a way the game doesn't like, and across a field which obscures the blowpipe dickheads very nicely, leading to many a "who the hell is shooting me" type situation. We arrive at a Mayan ball court, and while I would love to see a video game attempt to recreate what we know of Mesoamerican balling, this is a first-person shooter, so this set piece is simply a matter of shooting crystals with entirely too much health while enemies flick bogeys at your head. I'll be charitable and assume this was balanced under the assumption of multiplayer, but still, snore. The mid-boss shows up again with a new and final weapon for us to play with, the Time Warp Gun, a weapon that is available very rarely that generates a kind of vortex effect that almost invariably is going to be half inside the floor, that slows enemies inside of a pretty narrow radius. It's good for locking down this specific mini-boss, which is probably why they give it to you here to demonstrate that use case, which you could argue is smart game design, but it's also a bit funny to give you the solution to a problem about 3 seconds before it happens. It's also just about the only thing this weapon is good for, since it doesn't do any damage of its own. He goes down, another level completed.
Shit, we're alright.
Next level puts us in some sort of aqueduct-type environment, except all the water is green. The Mayans were famed for their preference for Mountain Dew. It does make for some nice visual variety at least, since up to this point the game has been almost entirely similar looking temples and jungles. This one even has the boldness to include some platforming. Look upon these tiny platforms in despair as your parkour skills are put to the ultimate test. You can also just run straight through the fire below and Skyrim your way up the cliff if you can't be arsed. You know, whatever. Walking upstairs, the floor unceremoniously breaks, dumping me into the Gatorade, where I'm given instructions to teleport? But nothing seems to be there. And then it tells me to destroy the crystals, but the rocket launcher is the only thing that seems to have any effect. But nothing happens even when I do blow them up. I'll save the time here and say flat out, this is a bug. I have no idea why, but this set piece didn't start properly, so I fling myself to my death to restart. Fortunately, this game has mid-level checkpoints, as jarring as that is for a Left 4 Dead clone, and this time the set piece works properly. Pots fall down, you shoot them and they explode, and your goal is to shoot them when the pot is near the crystal. Rocket launcher is still a valid solution though, and probably easier since for some reason these pots can be mysteriously hard to hit as they whiz by. Completing this, what I am going to very generously call a puzzle, creates a teleporter to yet another mini-boss fight, and I should note these have all doubled in health from the last campaign because we are supposed to be escalating in difficulty as we go here. I burst him down with this crazy weapon swapping technique because at some point I worked out you can bypass weapon fire rate restrictions by changing your gun, and it's one of those things that becomes hard to not do once you've realized it's a thing. And I've probably been accidentally using it all throughout the footage without realizing it. Being able to rapid-fire the sniper rifle is extremely useful to combat the tankier enemies. This gets us to the end of the level, even though I only have 2 out of the 3 skulls, but the game allows the stage to complete anyway. This too is a bug. This specific level just doesn't have 3 skulls in it, despite what the UI claims. Our next level sees us presented with a conundrum. Shoot all the good pots. What is a good pot? The ones that aren't smoking, of course, a thing that is barely visible. You heard it here, folks. Don't do drugs. Do not smoke that bad pot. This is just about the only set piece the game isn't constantly harassing you with enemy spawns during, making it one of the only times you can appreciate a quiet atmosphere. This is with the audio sliders cranked, by the way. The music is just this quiet. The quiet doesn't last for all too long, though, as after completing this, the game throws 4 of these guys at you, all spawning enemies, and seriously, look at how much damage they take. This is still going. Damn near a full minute of constant shooting from 4 people to drop one of them. On normal mode. We move on to an arena space, and boy, I hate this part. In here, multiple boar enemies spawn in waves and attack you, but I never ever hear them coming. I'm convinced the game just spawns them wherever you're not looking. There's a weirdly huge interval between spawn waves, and I'm pretty sure this is also a bug of some description. I've had variances in timing here on the order of minutes. The AI is terrible at avoiding the charges, and they're not only quite damaging if you fail to dodge one, they can knock weapons out of your hands and send them flying, possibly somewhere where you can't get them. It sucks. I hate the boars. While I'm here, a note on difficulty. The vast majority of footage used here is from a normal mode playthrough. I did make an effort to complete the game on expert, and while I was able to get through the first campaign without much graying of my hair, this is where I was forced to stop. I just couldn't deal anymore. I spent like 30 minutes trying to get through this before being forced to stop by the game fucking crashing after failed attempt number 20 or something. On expert, the boars are faster and they instantly down you on contact, so the bots can't stay alive for more than 3 seconds and my margin for error is almost non-existent. I got pretty close a number of times but never quite sealed the deal. I'm sure it's possible to do, but I couldn't find any footage of anyone else bothering to do it, and I also couldn't be bothered to try and bash my head against this shit level. Even in the normal mode playthrough, I'm running around hanging on by a thread against the giant mega boar that caps off this level, because the bots are all useless and I just ditch them to clear the stage once I somehow manage to clutch out the kill. My anger stays freshly stoked during the next level, which is a descent down a cliff where you end up running through alternating pillars of flames with more of these fucking boars bearing down on you. The bots are once again terrible at actually navigating these sorts of problems, so my game plan going in was to just abandon them and break for the level exit, which was going well until... that would be the game crashing again. A crash like this will erase any mid-level checkpoints you may have hit, leaving you to start the stage from the top. On my second attempt, 2 of the bots tire of the repetition and fling themselves off the cliff, because sometimes bots just don't navigate the space properly and accidentally kill themselves. Rest in peace, Kelly, you thundering dumbass. I decide I too tire of this universe, and join them. Except actually, this is a clever trick I've learned. See, I'm the world's foremost Revelations 2012 scholar, a position I am not actually very proud of. But I've played this game through on several different computers, and I found crashing on this level happened on all of them. Dying on purpose and causing a checkpoint restart at the midway point seems to work to prevent this crash. So now all problems are solved, and they fell off the level again? Rest in peace, Kelly! I hate you, you stupid mother— Next attempt, things pan out a little better, and I'm able to make it through the fire hallway. Kelly still falls off the map, though. Except even though I make it to the end of the level, the stage just refuses to end for some reason. I'm here desperately clearing the enemies off, trying to survive, but the game refuses to just end. You might think this is because the game functions on Left 4 Dead rules, and you need to clear out all the enemies before the stage can end. But it doesn't. I've had stages end with enemies standing right in front of me before. I genuinely have no idea why this happens sometimes. It seems to be yet another bug because it's particular to certain levels. This campaign has sucked. Get me out of here. Boss level the second, check out these cool skeletons on the wall.
It's the Skeleton King!
Kukulkan, the serpent god, is a pretty simple fight. He shoots poison, don't stand in the goop, and then swings his tail back and forth to cause knockback. You're supposed to crouch inside these holes to evade the tail, but as you can see here, it just doesn't work sometimes. Shocker. And knockback as a damage-dealing tool is prone to those same inconsistencies as in the first boss, where sometimes you take no damage and sometimes die immediately. But it's easy enough to just stand behind the tail instead and repeatedly blast away. Kukulkan is largely easier than the first boss since the game gives you the shotgun for this fight, letting you get through his health bar a bit faster. The bosses in general are a welcome reprieve of difficulty. Ball Court. Didn't we already do a Ball Court? Third campaign and we're already repeating ideas? Nevertheless, ball we must, as this is the opening level of the third campaign, and where the game really cranks the difficulty as it fully doubles down on the absurd number of enemy spawns, and almost every single level from this point on is going to regularly make you fight the absurdly tanky enemy spawner. Seriously, I cannot get over this. Why don't these things die, ever? Why do they spawn in groups? The enemy span reaches truly unhinged levels when reaching the ball court proper, being a huge open area populated with just about every enemy type simultaneously. The ball court itself is a series of squares where a light gravitational effect tries to pull you in. It's really not very important. Every encounter is now a constant struggle to stay above water as the enemy deluge continues. Rarely are enemy spawns truly infinite, but Horde attacks can take so long to fight through you might genuinely believe they're infinite. It is easier to progress at this point by abandoning teamwork and rushing to the end at all costs, because patiently weathering the attacks is tedious and difficult, but rushing ahead only works if you already know where the hell you're going. Nevertheless, the patient way is possible. Unless you're playing expert, abandon all hope, just go, go, go. Let's relax on a boat ride instead. Perhaps fearing the previous level was too intense, the next level sees us enjoying drifting down a canal where enemies teleport onto the boat because the river itself is made to respawn you in the boat if you fall off. But it will also teleport enemies if they haphazardly walk into the river by mistake. The bots also will not leave the boat for any reason, so they miss out on being able to get shotguns. They also continue to demonstrate outstanding spatial awareness. Completing our little voyage, we see the mid-boss health bar pop in, still cut off as usual, but it's gained another 20,000 health, and oh boy, 60,000 health mini-bosses, who I remind you are pretty capable of stun-locking you to death if they feel like it. But once again, the real threat are these goddamn boars. They start spawning in massive groups at this point, and it just makes everything fall apart so fast. The level is completed, but it was a struggle. The next level begins with a mini-boss immediately that instantly shreds the party's health. We do get thrown one last tool here. The sniper rifle's alternate fire can finally be collected, which generates a shield on an ally that makes them totally invulnerable for a surprisingly long time. It's extremely handy because while the bots are dumb, allowing them to soak aggro with impunity for an extended period of time is still useful, but it's incredibly hard to come by with barely any being in the game. After completing a puzzle involving pushing some statues while being assaulted with constant spawns, I do the pragmatic, if somewhat disappointing option of hitting a checkpoint and immediately taking the death to reset to full health and ammo. And god did I need it, because this upcoming cave gauntlet is draining. I'm running out of ways to say there are too many fucking enemies and they all take too long to kill, but there are too many fucking enemies and they all take too long to kill. So screw the patient approach, here's the play. Kill one of the enemy spawners, hope they randomly drop a haste power, and absolutely gun it for the exit. I'm ignoring all level design, all encounters, get me the hell out of here. And it works. This is just about the only time a non-boss application of the Time Warp gun came in handy, since you can shoot it at your feet to slow down a pursuing horde.
I'm going to die and I can't. Oh, hell yeah!
On the penultimate level, the Great Pyramid, the game truly abandons any pretense of being more thoughtfully constructed and begins the level with two kinds of enemy spawns, both the stationary statue kind and the enemy kind running around. It's an absolute brute force numbers approach to difficulty. Maybe if I were a Call of Duty player I'd have more stamina for shooting foreigners, but I'm firmly tapped out at this point. I'm just trying to get this over with. This level seems to almost encourage a rushing approach, being essentially a huge circle, or square, I guess. Pyramids are more square than they are circle. I mean, they're pyramids, but the base is... Look, you know what I mean. Point is, you gotta loop around this whole thing to get to the end, and enemies spawning in seems to be truly infinite in this level. I never was able to hold out long enough to see an end to it. This level is actually quite short, but despite my frantic dash for the top being a success, I once again run into the problem of the level deciding not to end for reasons unknown. This happens multiple times, and I'm getting even more pissed off because I just don't know what this stupid game wants from me. On about the 5th attempt, I even managed to make it up with the bots impressively still alive somehow, and there are many moments where there are no enemies around and the stage still doesn't end, except for when it suddenly finally does, despite this guy being right in my face. Seriously, it makes no sense. What is going on here? Sod it, who cares? We move on to the final boss, Ixtab, goddess of thing I can't say on YouTube or I will be destroyed by my corporate overlords. For all the bullshit I just endured, this fight is mercifully simple. She just sprints at you and attacks, and then flies up, farting bombs as she goes, and seems to drag the bots away with ropes, but I never had this actually happen to me in specific. The main thing here is that since this boss gives you access to all the weapons, you can just melt her HP in seconds, and before you know it, it's over.
Yes.
Yep, that's the game. That's Revelations 2012. A pretty awful game, and what the hell are these credits? What am I looking at? Why does about half the development team have the same last name? Are these vacation photos? Special thanks to our partner Valve. Also, hang on, why is this the end? Weren't there 5 campaigns? Okay. One thing at a time. Firstly, the credits. This is where I'm going to say some potentially not very kind things, but given that half the development credits belong to people with the name Weeks, it seems fairly reasonable to infer that this game was some kind of family project. Who knows, maybe there was just a lot of weeks involved by pure coincidence. The Mayan calendar is famous for that. More seriously, between the credits mostly consisting of a single family and literally containing what looks like family and vacation photos, it paints a picture of a middle-class family that inexplicably got the idea to try their hand at creating a video game. You know, the kinds of people who were well off enough to drop at least 20 grand or so on licensing the source engine after their vacation trip to Chichen Itza for reference footage. Now, I am not mad at any of these people, to be clear. In fact, I think this little slideshow is kind of cute. It's unfailingly earnest, and I hope all of these people are doing well. Despite everything, Revelations is a playable video game, and that's more than a lot of people will achieve, but it does potentially explain a lot about why Revelations is, frankly, crap. Maybe it was something the kids really wanted to do, like the video game version of those weird-ass music labels that will produce a song for your kid and insert a weird guy rapping into it for some reason. Who knows, but this game's production doesn't seem to have been the result of any typical arrangement, even by the standards of independent development. While Revelations is a playable game, barely, what I cannot say is that it is a complete game, because these 2 campaigns, Tides of Blood and Underworld Passage, are not selectable. There seems to have been a vague plan to add them in a post-launch update, but after the game released and presumably sold poorly and received a harsh response, they abandoned those plans. But they didn't abandon the game itself. You may notice in the little campaign select images that the characters are wearing completely different outfits, when in the actual game, it's all power suits. What's up with that? Well, this, my friend, is a remnant of the first version of Revelations 2012. Yes, everything you saw, everything I played through, is the improved version. Revelations 2012 2.0, if you will. Over the course of the game's initial year of release, a rapid-fire series of updates was made, changing many of the levels, entire mechanics, and the looks of the player characters. Unfortunately, this original version of the game was not archived anywhere, and SteamDB doesn't list any packages older than 2014. Making this original version of the game effectively lost media as far as I can tell. Cause who the hell would be keeping a torrent alive for this, of all things? Fortunately, popular YouTuber Jesse Cox did upload a full playthrough at the time, so I took the liberty of watching the whole thing to see what changed, and it's mostly a lot of small things rather than huge sweeping edits. A couple of levels had minor bits reworked or removed, and the first level was completely redone, but most of the game's levels are the same. One of the major things that seems to have instead been actively lost in the transition between updates is the entire intro cutscene, which is nowhere to be found in 2.0. I love this guy T-posing with his shirt saying Army in impact font. The craziest gameplay thing that got changed is that in the original version, you only unlocked a new weapon every boss you defeated. You would spend the entire first campaign with nothing but the basic pea shooter, only unlocking the shotgun by defeating the first boss, and so on for the sniper. The rocket and time warp guns just don't exist at all. This seems like it'd make an already hard game even harder without access to good weapons for 2/3 of it. And the addition of checkpoints, which were not a thing at all in the original version, presumably in response to widespread complaints about the difficulty. So you can see that there was a genuine attempt to improve the game and make something of it. Someone did clearly care enough about the game to rework parts of it, largely for the better too. But the whole could not be salvaged, and the final 2 updates took place on August 2013, with a patch note that hilariously reads added dancing back because one of these updates removed it amidst all the bug fixes. And then 4 years of silence before the game was made free to play in September 2017, presumably so whoever was managing the odd sale the game still made could wash their hands and simply be done with it. Not the most inspiring of endings to this story, but that's the way it goes sometimes. On the plus side, being both free and on Steam means it's easier than ever to experience a truly prime cut of bad gaming. See if you can convince your friends to complete Expert before your friendship disintegrates. It may have failed to recapture the greatness of the game it's based on, but that's okay, because so has absolutely everything else made in its likeness for the past 15 years or so. But nevertheless, Revelations earns the dubious distinction of being bottom class even in a pile of imitators. It is the worst Left 4 Dead clone. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, consider subscribing to the channel for more videos about interesting games, and if you want to appear in these credits, consider supporting the channel on the Patreon. If I get enough support, I could buy some friends to play through this game in co-op with. Please think about what I've suffered through. Please.